Hi everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoy our shows, please like our videos and subscribe to our channel. And you can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 24th of September 2019, and our guest today is the founder of the Exopolitics Institute and the Exopolitics Journal, focusing on the existence of UFOs and alien extraterrestrial life on planet Earth and everywhere in the universe. He's an author, lecturer, and the host of Exo News TV. Dr. Michael Salla. Good evening from Copenhagen, Denmark, and aloha and good morning to you, Dr. Michael Salla, joining us from Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. Welcome to the show and thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lucas.
For years and years, you and many other notable UFO researchers have been encouraging and demanding that the US government in particular must finally officially disclose the existence of UFOs and the presence of alien extraterrestrial life, not only on planet Earth, but in other planetary systems, even dimensions. Do you think that the government will ever reveal and disclose these hidden secrets? And if they do, what will happen then?
A very interesting question. When I first began doing this research, I really believed that the government was hiding all of the truth about extraterrestrial life, UFO, classified programs, and so forth. But the more I continued to do the research, I found out that the government doesn't know itself. That in fact, all of this information is actually kept in classified programs within the military intelligence community and within major aerospace corporations. So really only a few members of government actually know the truth. So that's been my big awakening over the last close to 20 years now that I've been researching this, is really appreciating how the government itself doesn't know what is going on. That it really is just a very few select individuals in government, in Congress, in the executive branch of government, but the ones that truly know, these are the ones that people describe as the deep state, people that work in very highly classified programs, and you find that in the military intelligence community and in major corporations.
But many other governments have actually spoken about it. They have revealed that they know about UFO existence and maybe even extraterrestrial life, or at least UFOs. But the US government seems to be very, very secretive about these particular topics.
Well, it's very important that we distinguish between UFO reports. Typically what many governments do, like Britain, France, Australia, Chile, Brazil, what they do is they release the raw data in terms of UFO reports and then basically say that, well, you know, our government has told the truth about UFOs and extraterrestrials. But really, if you look at it, all they've done is released raw reports from the public, sometimes from military pilots, but what they don't do is release their analyses of these, and that's a big difference. So all governments that have released a little bit of information on UFOs, they've just released these raw reports, but very rarely, Do they release the analyses? And even now in the United States, you have a lot of people very excited about the US Navy's reports of UFO sightings in 2004 and 2015, where there's video and Navy pilots. But again, you look at that, what you're having is just the raw reports, the raw data. You don't have the intelligence. And what that's telling us is that basically we're just given the very superficial layer of what the government, what military intelligence community knows. But to go deeper, we need to have the intelligence assessments of these reports, and no government has released these yet.
Talking about the existence of extraterrestrials and interdimensionals, it has actually gone from obscurity to popularity in recent years. But could there actually be an agenda behind the entire field of ufology? Could the so-called alien threat, the alien takeover threat, be part of a top elitist plan, a new world order agenda?
What we're seeing now is a lot of efforts to describe the UFO phenomenon in terms of a threat, in terms of whoever is behind it might constitute a national security threat to the United States and other major governments in the world. And that's very interesting when you look at these Navy pilot sightings from 2004. What happened was that in 2007, there was $22 million that was set aside by the US Congress for the study of these UFO reports. And they called the study the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. So it was very interesting because they framed it all in terms of a threat. And many people within that program, even today, describe these UFO sightings as a potential threat. And so that really raises the possibility that the public is being prepared for some kind of acknowledgement where UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomena, as the Navy is now calling it, that these constitute some kind of national security threat. So we need to be very, very careful here because governments and the military routinely lie. I mean, it's almost like that's part of the job description. And so we need to be very careful when they start describing UFOs as a threat, because really, when we look at what the public is describing, it's not clear that they're a threat. Many actually report very positive, benevolent contact with these UFOs and their occupants. So, we can't just assume that it's a threat.
But could it actually be part of a New World Order agenda and that it's not real? The whole field of ufology has been gagged in a way? Could that be so?
Well, there is a New World Order agenda to kind of centralize things. In the 1960s, there was a report from Iron Mountain which described this kind of New World Order effort to present UFOs as a threat in order to basically get enough support for maintaining the war industry and the armaments industry, and to kind of like perpetuate the current world order, which is trying to centralize power into fewer and fewer institutions. So yeah, that goes back to the 1960s, and certainly I think there's an element to all this field about UFO reports being used in some way to create a kind of false threat, an illusion that we are under some kind of space invasion, and so this is something that we need to be very careful, because it's quite possible, and people have been warning about this for decades now, of an alien false flag event where advanced technology can be used to make it look like we're being attacked by negative extraterrestrials, but it would all be concocted.
So in what way do you think that the secret hidden government, deep state factions of the military is playing a role in possibly implementing disinformation, confusion, or even real valid information in the field of ufology and conspiracy cover-up research, could there actually be a controlling force behind this field as well?
What I've seen in my research is that there really are conflicting agendas. There seem to be two major factions, at least in the United States. You know, one faction, which I can call, say, the deep state, they want to keep the secrecy. They want to make it look like UFOs and aliens are a threat, and they want to create a new world order. So everything is being presented from that perspective. There's another faction, though, which I call the white hats. These are groups who are more open, wanting to respect the principles of the US Constitution, respect people's liberties. And so they want the truth to come out. And they're basically saying that, yes, you know, there's good extraterrestrials and there's not so good extraterrestrials. And there's been advanced technologies that have been developed from reverse engineering of captured alien spacecraft that goes all the way back to the 1940s. So, you know, depending on which of these two factions has more power, we see the major media kind of like, you know, being a reflection of that kind of, you know, conflicting agendas.
But there seems to be also very conflicting opinions and perspectives between UFO researchers, people who are working in this field. Actually a bit of fighting as well. What are your thoughts on that, this internal conflict also going on?
Well, it's really a methodological debate. It goes back to the question of, is ufology a physical science like physics and chemistry, where you have raw data and you analyze it using science methodologies that can be found in laboratories and everything is replicable? Or is this UFO phenomenon or exopolitics phenomenon a political science, a social science, where you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people's recollections of what happened, and that's something that you have to analyze using social science tools, and you need to kind of look at people's credibility and their reputations and assess whether they're telling the truth or not. So, you know, this is the methodological debate. Some people believe that ufology needs to be as much a hard science as possible, using kind of like empirical data, documentation, and other people say that you know, ufology or exopolitics is more like social sciences. We need to look at people, we need to look at their testimonies, what they're experiencing, and take these testimonies seriously.
But can we actually trust, let's just say, whistleblowers or leaked documents even, or documents from the Freedom of Information Act? Those documents can be falsified as well.
Well, you know, any document can be falsified. This is one of the intelligence community's specialties, is producing false documents. But, you know, in my experience, you know, what's happening is that, you know, you have people coming out revealing what they know, you know, whether they're a whistleblower or whether, you know, there's a leaked document that comes out. And then there's an effort to try and discredit that, to try and create a controversy, a false controversy around that. You know, because ultimately, especially when we're looking at whistleblowers or witnesses, I mean, these are people who say that they saw something or that they were part of a government project or a corporate project, and they say what they experienced. And, you know, you can be skeptical or you can be totally believing that. But at the end of the day, you know, that is kind of data that needs to be looked at. You can't dismiss it, because eyewitness testimonies are very important in any investigation. And so we just can't dismiss people who say that, you know, they were part of these programs or they're whistleblowers, you know, because maybe we say, you know, we're skeptical in some way. So we need to look at all of the data. And you know, I like to look at whistleblowers because I find that with whistleblowers and insiders, you get like the closest view we can get to the big picture of what's happening. You don't get that as much from FOIA documents, official documents, or even leaked documents. But whistleblowers, insiders give us a better picture of what is going on.
And you're meeting a lot of those, a lot of whistleblowers, a lot of experiencers when you are going around the world, and of course through your work for Exopolitics. But how do you use discernment when getting involved with these whistleblowers or experiencers or so-called former military personnel? How do you know whether they're not, telling you the truth, speaking the truth? What is your method or criteria for believing someone and their stories, or, well, maybe dismissing someone if you suspect that they can be disinformers?
Sure, it's very simple actually. When the costs of being a whistleblower outweigh the benefits, then you have someone who's probably very credible. In other words, if you have a professional and they come forward and they start talking about, well, I was involved in the government program and we did this and this, and that damages their career, and then they don't get any benefit from this other than just saying, well, I'm telling the truth, this is what happened to me. The cost for them coming forward outweighs the benefit, and we see that with a lot of professionals who have come forward. One of the things that very much impressed me when I began doing this research in 2001 was watching a lot of the whistleblowers that Dr. Stephen Greer was able to assemble as part of the Disclosure Project. These were people who had careers in the military, in government, in corporations for like 20 years or so forth. These were people with professional reputations, and their reputations would be damaged if they came forward and started to tell lies or disinformation about their involvement in UFOs and extraterrestrial life.
But could some of these people actually be disinformers unwittingly? Maybe as part of a mind control programming experiment or anything like that, or maybe even bought or paid by the government who wants to put out this information, maybe to confuse people?
Well, there are people who are part of the intelligence community who come out to disinform and to kind of like put people off the track. And so, yes, you need to be very discerning about such people. They maybe have a connection to the military intelligence community. Maybe their testimonies are wildly conflictual with others. Maybe they lack internal consistency. There's ways to look at someone who's spreading disinformation to spot them. But you need to investigate it closely, and you're correct. Discernment is necessary.
And are you able to do that? Have you experienced trusting somebody who turned out to be a fraud, maybe unwittingly?
I would say there are people that I was at the beginning very supportive of, but the more I researched their case, I became more and more skeptical and just distanced myself from them. In some cases, these are people who have worked with the intelligence community, and so they say that that's part of their modus operandi, where they will put out a story and then they have to put in a lot of disinformation to protect themselves. So you have to be very careful, because some of these people actually say that they do it to protect themselves, but it is disinformation. And yes, so in such cases, I do distance myself and stop working with these people.
And they actually do it on purpose.
Yes, this is one of the things about people who are insiders, who may be blowing the whistle on this, that for them to be able to reveal the truth, they need to also embed that within this information. So there needs to be some kind of almost like Churchill's famous dictum that in the time of war, truth is so precious it needs to be surrounded by a litany of lies. Similarly with this kind of field, sometimes people are revealing the truth as they know it, but to protect themselves, they actually embellish or they introduce lies. So, that just makes it even more difficult to try to discern what's going on. So, in such cases, I'm very careful.
And even more difficult for the ordinary public listening to this, trying to find their way in this field, listening to so many different researchers and also with conflicting opinions and ideas of what the world is really like, both in the field of ufology and also within the truth movement and conspiracy research.
It is difficult for the general public to know. What I try and do as a researcher is to present the best data that I have on whatever phenomenon I'm focusing on. So, for example, I've been focusing the last few years on secret space programs, and I present all of the data that I can find. You know, some of it is whistleblower data, but some of it is documents released by FOIA. Some of it are leaked documents. There's also a lot of science papers that have come forward showing the feasibility of a lot of these concepts. So I'm able to try to put together the best case I have as to the reality of this phenomenon. But at the end of the day, every reader has to decide for themselves whether this is true, because ultimately, government is not acknowledging any of this. So, you have the word of the whistleblowers, the insiders, the leaked documents versus what governments are not saying about this phenomenon.
So, speaking of the secret space program, please tell us a little bit about what that actually is. And also, I know that you are working a lot with Goode, who is another whistleblower. Please tell us if you feel that his story and what he's presenting is correct.
Sure. Secret space programs are based on the idea that from the beginning of the UFO age, whether we start from the Roswell crash of 1947 or go back earlier to say events in the United States or Europe, we can say that in the last 70 plus years that different major governments have recovered crashed UFOs with advanced anti-gravity and electromagnetic propulsion systems. And in the last 70 years, the top scientific facilities in the United States, Europe, in Asia as well, have been studying and reverse engineering these technologies, and now have been able to create functional anti-gravity spacecraft using advanced electromagnetic propulsion systems that can actually travel up to the speed of light and even beyond, using some of these advanced technologies that have been secretly developed.
Because of the crash in 1947, you think, where they obtained this technology, the military?
The 1947 Roswell crash is one of the more famous cases involving the retrieval of these technologies and the reverse engineering of those technologies. And as far as I can tell, in the 1960s, the first prototypes were developed by the US Air Force and the US Navy of some of these captured spacecraft. And in the 70s, those prototypes then became operational, and they began developing squadrons of anti-gravity craft. So basically, we have a history of how these secret space programs were developed. Now, Goode came forward in 2014, began talking about his involvement in one of these secret space programs, and I've worked closely with him since March of 2015, and he's revealed a lot of information. Some of the things that he's revealed, I was able to confirm through circumstantial evidence. For example, he started talking about slave colonies on Mars. So in 2015, he's talking about slave colonies on Mars, which is a very interesting and controversial topic to propose. But at the same time, the British Interplanetary Society organized a seminar in London on the topic of how to remove a Mars dictator running a base that was producing advanced technologies.
Really?
So this was something that coincided with Goode's revelations. So to me, that was a very interesting synchronicity, suggesting that he was really revealing some important truths. More recently, there have been other examples, but the one that I like to cite the most is Corey was able to release 2 papers from the Defense Intelligence Agency dealing with traversable wormholes and warp drive. And these technologies that he says were part of the secret space program when he was involved in it, he was the first person to release these 2 DIA documents. And later on, it was confirmed that the documents were genuine. So, you know, right there you have a big kind of boost to his credibility that he was trusted enough by some insiders within the defense intelligence agencies who gave him these documents saying that, you know, these documents verify part of your story, release them to the public. And that's what he did. And they do verify aspects of his story. And he was the first one to release those two papers to the public.
And we know that those documents are real and not falsified.
Exactly. Those documents, after he released them in December of 2017, they were confirmed as genuine by the Federation of American Scientists. Stephen Aftergood put in some Freedom of Information Act requests to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he got confirmation that those 2 papers were part of a list of 38 papers that had been secretly prepared for the Pentagon.
But just before you said that those documents and also documents from the Freedom of Information Act can actually be falsified as well.
It's much harder to falsify a document that's been released into the public realm from the Freedom of Information Act. There have been falsified documents that have been released to UFO researchers. I'm thinking of the famous one, which is the Aquarius Document that was released in 1980, and that was released by Bill Moore. And that was a false document. And he was released it based on a government document that he says that he had access to, but you know, that was shown to be false. So yes, there are documents that have been leaked that have been shown to be false. But with the Freedom of Information Act, what you have is a public record that can be tracked. So, you know, there you don't have really any room for falsification.
But there are certain researchers and people who are skeptical towards, well, not only Corey Goode, but several people who have come out. I think possibly Linda Moulton Howe talked about her being a bit skeptical towards his story. What are your thoughts on that? It seems that some of you top UFO researchers have different opinions on different whistleblowers and their story.
Well, that's right. Yes, there are differing opinions on whistleblowers. Some people are very skeptical on Corey Goode because they say, well, he's produced no hard evidence. But I've just mentioned a couple of examples where there is evidence that what he is saying is grounded in truth. But ultimately, it comes down to you know, spending time with these people, interviewing them, getting to know them. And I can say that many of Corey Goode's critics really haven't spent time with him. They haven't really gotten to know him and kind of like ask him the questions about his background, about his story, and why it's so credible.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on the Bob Lazar story? True or not?
I think Bob Lazar is an example of someone who was chosen by the deep state to be given access to some of this reverse engineering of flying saucer technology, knowing that he would become a whistleblower. So in other words, I think he's genuine. He really did experience what he said, but I think he was chosen for that purpose, because this is part of the goal of, you know, if you're wanting to maintain a secrecy system, you do it by releasing the truth, but through people who can be easily discredited. And so Bob Lazar was chosen because he was someone that could be easily discredited. They removed his academic credentials. They removed all records of his work history. They even arranged for him to be charged on some kind of prostitution charges in Nevada. So someone that could be easily presented as an unreliable character, but yet is revealing the truth. And I think this is the way in which the military intelligence community is able to move forward in revealing some of the truth. That the best way of hiding the truth is to do it in plain sight. You put the truth out there, but you choose someone who's not credible to do it, or you publish it through a disreputable media news site, like, for example, the National Enquirer or the World Daily News, which were notorious for fabrication and embellishing stories. But that's the way in which you could publish the truth. You hide it out in plain sight, and that way the truth is out there, but it can be easily discredited because the source is not a reputable one. And I think Bob Lazar was chosen for that reason.
So it was actually orchestrated, you believe, from within, but he didn't know about it, or what? Or was he part of it, in your opinion?
I don't think Bob Lazar was part of it at all. I think Bob Lazar, he had met with Dr. Edward Teller, and Dr. Teller put in a recommendation concerning Lazar. When they did their background interviews on Lazar, they found out about his friends, and one of his friends was John Lear, who's a notorious UFO researcher, putting out a lot of information about government cover-ups on UFOs. And so they knew Bob Lazar's friends, and so they knew very well that when he was introduced to this phenomenon, that he would start to talk. And that's exactly what happened. I don't think he was in the job for 6 months before he began talking and became a security threat. So I think this was something that was set up from the very beginning. They wanted Bob Lazar to get out there and then discredit him.
Through John Lear and also George Knapp, who broke the story, right?
Well, George Knapp is a very credible investigative reporter, and someone who's done a lot of really good research in verifying Bob Lazar's background. But John Lear himself is very controversial, with a lot of kind of like theories and statements that have been coming out into the public arena for years. But he was a friend of Bob Lazar before he began working at Area 51 or at the S4 facility. And so the fact is that despite his friendship with John Lear, a notorious UFO researcher, Bob Lazar still got the job at the S4 facility. And so straight there, I think that's the best clue we have that Bob Lazar was set up.
So please talk about the current hot topic of Storm Area 51. What is that really all about? And could this initiative also be orchestrated by some factions of, let's say, the control system?
I would say that that's probably one initiative that I would be very skeptical of, that I think it's probably an example of, either it's part of some kind of manipulation, disinformation campaign, or a big distraction, because the thing is, Area 51 actually is a facility with two sites on it that does this kind of research. One is Groom Lake, which is where they did the research on all of the advanced spy planes that the CIA had been built for the CIA by Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. So they were built and researched and tested out at the Groom Lake facility at Area 51. But there's another facility nearby. It's called Papoose Lake, and that's where Bob Lazar says he worked, the S4 facility, and that's where they actually have genuine extraterrestrial artifacts and reverse-engineered spacecraft that use anti-gravity electromagnetic propulsion systems. That's at the S4 facility. So that's nowhere near, well, that's, it's about 20 miles away from the Groom Lake facility. So with this storm, Area 51, there was no kind of mention of that. It was just really, let's storm Area 51. And, really that's something that is likely to be very unsuccessful because it's such a highly guarded facility. I mean, maybe in raising consciousness, it can be a positive thing, but if you're not really presenting the full truth at the outset, which is that it's not at the Groom Lake facility, but at the Papoose Lake facility that the most advanced reverse engineering projects are being built, then I have to be very skeptical as to what the real agenda is.
So is Area 51 what they say it is, like many levels of experimentation, many levels underground?
Area 51 has many levels underground doing multiple projects. When we're talking about alien spacecraft and reverse engineering those, that facility, the S4 facility at Area 51, is the one that we need to pay attention to. And it is the one that is deep underground. Now, the thing about this is that this is really a kind of research facility. It's not a construction facility. Where the craft are now being constructed and tested is in Utah, in Dugway Proving Grounds, which is a very big military testing facility out near the Wasatch Mountains. And that's very large, very remote. So Area 51, a lot of the top secret projects that were occurring there after Bob Lazar came forward in the 1990s, these projects were moved over to this facility at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. And that's where they have the very large facilities underground. And that's where the most advanced projects are now being created. So Area 51 is really now just a kind of sideshow.
And they moved it because of the Bob Lazar story?
That's right, yes, because after the Bob Lazar story, many people began to go to Area 51 and camp out near the roadway there and look for the craft that were being tested. Because this is one of the things Bob Lazar was able to show that proved his case, that he said that, that the flying saucer he was working on, that there was a weekly test on a Wednesday night. So he took 6 friends with him, and they basically camped out overnight and saw this craft being tested on I believe it was a Wednesday night. So because of this, many people began going to Area 51, camping out at night and looking for the testing of these craft. So it was realized that there needed to be a new facility where these flying saucer craft that were being reverse engineered could be tested. So that's where they moved the most advanced projects over to the Wasatch Mountains, to Dugway Proving Ground. And so Area 51 today is more like a museum, like it's a kind of like anti-gravity alien museum now. But for the most recent research, you've got to go to Utah and the facility that's there.
So please talk about these underground military bases. What is actually taking place deep underground? There are many levels, and people talk about alien experiments, cloning, and whatnot. Please explain a little bit about what you know is going on at those military bases.
Okay, those are underground military bases. They are where there are many different compartmentalized special access programs that are being conducted. And so these are very different to one another. So someone might be working in an advanced project, for example, concerning electromagnetic propulsion, like Bob Lazar was working on exotic propulsion systems. Another person might be working at the same base on another floor on, say, the navigation system. How, for example, the mind can connect with the technology to form some kind of fusion between the mind and technology for the navigation of these craft. Another project in that same facility could be looking at, say, genetic modification to see, well, how do we genetically modify people so that they can be part of these programs. So what you're having at these underground facilities is multiple unacknowledged special access programs that are all being conducted secretly. People in each of these programs don't know about one another. They're sworn to secrecy, so they're not supposed to talk about each other's projects. And the only people who know the big picture of what's going on is the group that's running it all. And that's typically major corporations that run these different unacknowledged special access programs. And ultimately, people refer to the control committee as Majestic 12 or Majority 12. There's a committee at the very apex that has responsibility for these technologies.
And the MJ12, Majestic 12, is real as well?
Definitely, yes. That was set up in the 1940s. We've had documents and insiders talk about Majestic 12 as being very real. And initially, it was set up as a entity with 12 individuals in it, Majestic 12, and then later on it expanded to have more of a European, more of an international membership, because basically, as I understand it, the secret space programs basically became corporatized. In other words, it went beyond just being a US military intelligence project to one where major US allies like England, Canada, Australia, even France, major countries were involved in some way. So it became more of an international committee. And so that's where I think the Majestic 12 committee is today. And apparently even the Russians have been working on these programs since during the Cold War, which is a surprise for a lot of people, because it suggests that the Cold War was really just a kind of sideshow to make it easier for both the Russians and the Americans to raise a lot of money for these secret programs.
A New World Order orchestrated conflict.
It was a charade, yes, that the Cold War was a charade. And even now, this kind of new Cold War between Russia and the United States, again, it's a charade that both countries collaborate quite extensively in these classified space programs and in their research on extraterrestrial life and extraterrestrial technologies. So they've been cooperating from at least the 1970s as far as I can tell.
So a lot of experimentation is taking place at these underground bases, and a lot of strange things are going on. But please tell us, what is the difference between hybrids and clones?
Well, hybrids are beings who are modified in some way genetically by extraterrestrials. So, you and I, for example, if many of these people who have had contact with extraterrestrials are concerned, we're hybrids, because up to 500,000 years ago, you had the indigenous species, the hominids on planet Earth, genetically modified by multiple extraterrestrial civilizations that have been visiting us for 500,000 years and genetically altering humanity.
Are we talking about Atlantis and Lemuria?
Even older, even going further back than Atlantis and Lemuria.
Oh.
That we go back 500,000 years. If you look at the records of the Sumerian civilization, some of the cuneiform texts, in there it talks about the Anunnaki as actually having been on Earth for 500,000 years and having genetically modified humanity. And so there you actually have a record of this kind of genetic modification going back hundreds of thousands of years.
What were the Anunnaki? What kind of, were they extraterrestrials? What were they?
In the Sumerian cuneiform texts that have been translated by various scholars, one of the more famous is Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote a series of books about his translation of the cuneiform texts. And he says that the word Anunnaki refers to basically ancient aliens, extraterrestrials who visited Earth in antiquity and basically began to genetically modify humanity. Then we look at people like von Daniken, who talked about many ancient records that describe extraterrestrials coming to the Earth and genetically modifying or interacting with humanity. So there's a lot of historical records talking about humanity being genetically altered by extraterrestrials. So if we take that seriously, then, you and I, we may be actually hybrids of these ancient extraterrestrials. But in answer to your question, it may be that more recently, people have been talking about these experiments that are being conducted by grey extraterrestrials who have been abducting millions of people in the United States and elsewhere around the world and genetically modifying them and creating another hybrid species. And so some people look at that as a possible threat, this new hybrid species that is being created by the greys.
And what do they look like?
The greys, these are like 3 to 4 foot tall beings that have kind of like long necks, very thin torsos, long thin arms, and big heads with really big eyes. That they themselves are clones.
Yes.
So they've been cloned, but what they're doing is that these clones, these greys, are creating a hybrid species, a hybrid human and grey extraterrestrial that they believe would be useful for them to download their consciousness into to perpetuate their species.
And what do that species look like? Meaning what these greys have been cloning. Do they look like humans?
The hybrid species, because we're talking about many thousands of people who are describing what the hybrids look like, because they often say that they're being taken on board the craft and have interacted with these hybrids, whether as babies or as young children. The descriptions range. The descriptions range from something that kind of like, typically is very thin, kind of like almost like an albino, no hair, and kind of like emotionally very, very vulnerable, but intellectually very gifted, but not having the kind of physical hardiness to be able to live on Earth. Others live on Earth and by and large can kind of like interact with the rest of humanity without being noticed. So there's a range of these hybrids, from those that look very similar to us to those that would be easily identified as not being human.
So they could actually be walking down the street and you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it was actually an alien hybrid cloned species or what?
That's right, yes. Some of them are sufficiently like us that they can easily interact amongst us.
Some people have been quite skeptical towards Zecharia Sitchin and what he wrote also about the Anunnaki, and said that there may have been an agenda behind that description that he did in translation. What are your thoughts on Sitchin?
When we look at Zecharia Sitchin, I mean, we're looking at one person's interpretation of these cuneiform texts. The important thing is the cuneiform texts themselves. There are hundreds of thousands of those, and they are a record of the Sumerian civilization and their interaction with the gods. So, they talk about the gods and they talk about how these beings help them develop these advanced technologies. Now, there are aspects of Zecharia Sitchin's work that I myself am skeptical of. Like I'm skeptical of the whole idea of Planet X, Nibiru, being something that comes in every 3,600 years, causing great catastrophe around the planet. I tend to be skeptical of that. But as far as the main thesis of Zecharia Sitchin, which is that extraterrestrials have for hundreds of thousands of years been interacting with humanity, genetically modifying them, helping them develop advanced technologies. This is borne out by a lot of other ancient records that people like Eric von Daniken have been putting out there for years. And of course, you have the Ancient Aliens series, which is very popular, and you have a lot of experts analyzing the ancient records and showing that this is very credible, that you do have these ancient records showing these advanced technologies that were part of the ancient world but were forgotten.
So do we actually know what these Anunnaki looked like?
That's a controversial issue. Some people say that the Anunnaki are reptilians, that these are reptilian beings that are here, that were here to kind of like trick us and enslave us. I think when we look at humanity per se as being genetically modified over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, I think the Anunnaki must look like us, because we look like them, because we're genetically created by them. And you actually have passages in the Bible, like in the book of Genesis, it says that the Elohim created man in their image. And it's like, well, who are the Elohim? Well, the Elohim are the Anunnaki, just another word for these advanced extraterrestrials that bioengineered humanity. There's a truth there, even in the Bible, that's reflected in many other ancient records that talk about these very human-looking advanced species that were called gods that genetically created humanity.
So they were not the Nordics.
As far as I know, there have been approximately 22 different extraterrestrial long-term genetic programs on the Earth. Like the Sumerians and the Anunnaki is one. The Pleiadians and the Scandinavian people are another. The Native American peoples and beings from other star systems such as Tau Ceti is another. So basically, there are extraterrestrial races that are more closely associated with the different major kind of ethnicities that we find all over the planet Earth. So, whether we're talking about Asian peoples, Mongolians, or we're talking about Native Americans, or Africans, or Australian Aboriginals, all of these different groups genetically can be connected to one or more different extraterrestrial species that created that hybrid out of the result of contributing their DNA to that species.
But if we are hybrids or clones or what, people say it is interesting that we have a reptilian brain, almost as if we were a mix between mammalian and reptilian DNA.
The reptilian brain, really what that refers to is the fight or flight principle that's contained in that kind of very ancient part of our brain. And that's really a self-preservation instinct. And that's what people refer to as the reptilian brain. It's really a self-preservation instinct just to protect ourselves. And as we evolve, as our brain develop, other aspects come in where we develop, say, the frontal cortex, where we are capable of higher thought and overriding that instinctual fight or flight mechanism in the reptilian brain within us. But certainly, this is part of the development of the human brain is an aspect of how the genetic modifications have been occurring over the hundreds of thousands of years.
So a controversial topic is shape-shifting. What are your thoughts on that? Is that true or false? Can some ET races actually shapeshift, and how is that done?
That's a very interesting thought. I think shapeshifting can be done through some kind of technological means, where some beings can wear a technology that generates a field around them where their appearance changes. So there's technology that can be used to create that shape-shifting appearance. There's also mind control, where people can be mind controlled to not see, say, a reptilian. So, this is part of the, if like a hypnotist can actually do that, can hypnotize people to kind of like see something very different to what their eyes are physically kind of taking in. So that even though their eyes might be seeing, say a man, the hypnotist might say, well, what you're seeing is a woman, and so the person might say, yeah, I'm seeing a woman or something. So this is a byproduct of hypnosis. So that could be happening.
But even if you're photographed or filmed, you will still see the shape-shifting, the projection, I mean.
Yes, this is right, because there's a very famous movie called They Live by John Carpenter, and what you have there is an example of mass hypnosis. Basically, all of us have been hypnotized through this subliminal process not to see extraterrestrial beings. And so there are extraterrestrials that live amongst us, but through this kind of mass hypnosis, we don't see them because our mind has been conditioned in a way where we're trained not to see a reptilian humanoid. We see a normal looking human. So there's mass hypnosis as well that's at play.
So everything that David Icke has been saying for 30 years is actually true, according to you? I
don't agree with all the things that David Icke says. I mean, I don't believe, for example, that, say, the British royal family are reptilian shapeshifters that can kind of like shift from one group, from one kind of form to another form at will. What I think probably is occurring is that they are beings who maybe have a predominance of reptilian genetics within them, that the reptilians have introduced their genetics into that bloodline and set them up as a ruling family, and so they have been kind of like an intermediary with the true reptilians. And when we're talking about true reptilians, we're talking about beings that are 100% reptilian in DNA, and that they are kind of humanoid, but they look like reptiles. And these have been described by different people as ranging from 7 to 8 feet or even bigger, and that they have kind of like the reptilian skin and so forth. And so these are people that are encountered. Now, they themselves don't shapeshift as far as I can tell, other than by using technology. So yeah, either through technology or through mass hypnosis, I think you can actually have this shapeshifting, but I don't think it's as common as David Icke is telling us.
So you don't believe in the British royal family that they can shapeshift, as David Icke says, but you do believe that it can happen. But why shouldn't it be the case with the royal family or anybody else in a position of control or power?
Well, because they're too much in the public arena. I mean, the thing is, mass hypnosis can be very effective if it's just working kind of in the background. But if you have like major international figures, it's because the mass hypnosis isn't going to work as well on everyone. For some people it's going to break down, and if it, for some people, especially people who have maybe stronger minds, that mass hypnosis is going to break down, and they're going to say, hey, Queen Elizabeth, she's a reptile. What are you talking about? She's not a human. They would be able to see quite clearly. So that's why I don't think they are shape-shifting reptilians themselves, because I think the ones that are true reptilians that we, through the mass hypnosis, see as humans, they operate in the background. They would be more like a next-door neighbor that maybe behaves in a strange way. You don't really see them that much, but they're there, and they're very strange or something like that. But that would be more the case of how you would have someone a reptilian operating in the public, but they don't really operate in the public eye like the British royal family, as David Icke is suggesting, in my view.
But why a next door neighbor? What's the purpose with that?
Because they're monitoring us, because we are a species that we have bred to the point where we constitute a major threat to the ecology of the planet. And they watch us to make sure that we don't destroy things. Because, this is an ecosystem that we share with these reptilians who have been here for thousands of years, even longer than us. If the human presence can be dated back to 500,000 years ago, the reptilian presence can be dated back to the age of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, and even longer. So we've had indigenous reptilians living on this planet and sharing this planet with us for millions of years. And so this is one of the things, just because they are largely underground or maybe have a kind of minimal presence on the surface, I think their main job when they are on the surface kind of living amongst us is to monitor what we're doing to make sure that we don't destroy the ecosystem.
So if they are the controlling force behind the elite top factions of the government and everything else, why aren't they part of the royal family who has those great positions of power?
Well, the indigenous reptilians, these are the ones that have been here for like millions of years, they do have an influence over surface humanity and an influence over ruling bloodlines. But as I mentioned earlier, there are many different groups here. There are Pleiadians here. There are groups from Alpha Centauri here. There are groups from Tau Ceti and Sirius here. And you also have reptilians from other worlds that are here. These are called draconian reptilians. So really, when we're looking at planet Earth, it's like a zoo. There are so many different kind of species that are visiting us from off-world that have been for hundreds of thousands of years interacting with us. And each of these species is very influential in creating a bloodline family.
Are they all part of controlling the human race and planet Earth the way we know it?
They are all collectively part of the control system, but it's done in a competitive mode. Like, for example, people often refer to the 13 ruling bloodline families.
Known as the Illuminati.
That's right. So these 13 ruling bloodline families, you really need to consider them not as a monolithic entity. You need to consider them more as like major corporations that compete for influence against one another. So, for example, Apple competes against Samsung, which competes against Google, which competes against Microsoft, and competes against Huawei and Lenovo. And so you have these major corporations that, while they are working in a similar kind of technological sector and have a common interest in how governments legislate, they are all competing against one another for influence and control. So it's the same thing with these ruling bloodline families. While they all have a kind of general consensus on how humanity is to move forward in a way that they can profit and take advantage of, nevertheless, they strongly compete with each other and even get into violent conflicts with one another.
And you believe that they are human beings, not partly extraterrestrial or off-planet beings?
I think that the ruling bloodline families, they have more of a predominance of extraterrestrial genetics within them.
Primarily reptilian?
They can be primarily reptilian, or they can have more Nordic, or the different kind of extraterrestrial subgroups, or the different extraterrestrial groups. More of that genetic quality can be present in one of these ruling families.
So please talk about the different alien races that you are aware of. How many types of ETs do you know of, and who are the benevolent ones and who are the malevolent ones?
Well, I did write a book about this. It's called Galactic Diplomacy. And in that book, I identified 20 different races, 20 different extraterrestrial races, and how they interact with humanity. So, of course, I talk about the Pleiadians and the beings from the Sirius system, beings from the Andromeda constellation, beings from Tau Ceti, beings from Alpha Centauri, as part of this kind of human-looking group that are generally benevolent, here to help us evolve, and have been interacting both with governments, militaries, and with private citizens.
So they're trying to do good.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes, they're trying to raise our consciousness. They're trying to help us resolve our conflicts between one another.
But why isn't Earth a better place then? It's not a very nice place to live.
Because we're a mixture. We're a mixture of very empathic people. There have been studies done on this. Most people, 95% of people are empathic. In other words, you have feelings for another person, like what happens to them. You just can't watch someone get cold-bloodedly killed right next to you. That you would stop that. But 5% of people are sociopaths. They enjoy that. They actually like to watch people get tortured and killed and raped and murdered. They enjoy that. They're sociopaths. So, and this is something that psychologists have found that is very distinctive in the human genome, in human physiology, that approximately 5% of people across all racial groups are psychopaths or sociopaths. And so that means that 95% of us are trying to do good, and that kind of reflects the 95% of, say, extraterrestrials that are generally trying to do good, but it's the 5% are the ones that have a lot of control, kind of like how the mafia gets control, or the triads get in control, or the kind of like drug cartels get in control. You're talking about a small percentage of a big population, but if you look at South America, or if you look at, say, Italy in the 1960s or 50s, people say, South America is controlled by the triads. These are bad people. Or Italy is controlled by the mafia, bad people, or, and so forth. But the truth is, it's only a small percentage that are sociopaths that are involved in crime, and that they control the rest of the population. So this is what's happening on planet Earth. We have a lot of really good people here on Earth, a lot of positive extraterrestrials, but the ones that really control things are sociopaths. And the best strategy to deal with them is to expose them.
And they are working with the malevolent alien types. And please talk about those then, reptilian and...
Draconian reptilians. There are also some grey extraterrestrials that are called tall greys. There are also insectoids. These are beings that look like praying mantis as well. They're also part of this control group, as well as the short greys that I mentioned earlier. So you have these groups that don't look human. We would recognize them immediately if we saw them, and if we weren't under hypnosis, or they weren't using some kind of advanced technology so that we couldn't see them. But they are clearly non-human, but still humanoid. They still have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes. So they're humanoid, but they're clearly not human. And they are part of this kind of like a control group that has set up these ruling bloodline families, and have kind of like set up this kind of control system that is predominantly ruled by sociopaths. That the more sociopathic you are, the more involved in kind of like satanic ritual abuse, then the more likely you're going to rise to higher positions.
Why do you think they're using these satanic rituals and child sacrifice and all these horrendous things that we hear about?
It's a way of showing subservience to the draconian reptilians, because if you look at pictures of Satan, these resemble very much a draconian reptilian. And this is the way in which the draconians are able to get absolute surrender from their minions, from people who are in high positions of authority, for them to show that they are truly loyal to their reptilian overlords is to participate in some of these satanic blood rituals where you will offer to Satan, or to, who in reality is a draconian warlord, you would offer to them, some sacrifice of a young child, and you would participate in a ritual abuse of a child to show your subservience to that being. And in doing so, then you become totally compromised and totally controlled by that faction that tape all of the things that you do.
So these reptilian beings actually take part in these elite satanic rituals, these ceremonies? They
can, yes. They're called upon to take part in it.
Called upon so that they manifest, or do they actually just walk through the door?
So that they manifest. They are fourth, fifth dimensional beings. And so, in one of these satanic rituals where they do go through the ritual of invoking the name of one of these beings and then creating doing the sacrifice, then one of these reptilians can manifest, because they're kind of like an energy portal has been created through that ritual practice, because they do use sacred geometry, do use the inverted pentagram to be able to create an interdimensional doorway for this reptilian to walk through and then manifest. And sure, they can participate in that ritual. I mean, this is where I agree with David Icke that yes, this is real. This does happen.
So actually, they could also be shapeshifters if they're walk-ins, so to speak, and they can take form and manifest from a different dimension then.
Well, the thing is, these reptilians are very prideful. They believe that the reptilian genetics is superior to human genetics, to anything else. So it would be like us humans developing the potential to shapeshift into, say, a pig. That we kind of look down on pigs as a lower life form that we exploit. So we would never think of shapeshifting into a pig because,
Only if it would serve a purpose, I would expect.
That's right.
For other people to see, the population who is unaware of all of this.
If there's a purpose. But I don't think that the reptilians would have some innate genetic ability to shapeshift, because I don't think the genetics allows that, but they would have the technology to do it, or they would have mind control to do it. But for them, they do have technology. So at the end of the day, they can just activate the genetics to shapeshift into what for them is a lower life form, which is us.
But is that because we are holographic in structure? Both them and even us, according to some people, because atoms, we're all made of atoms, and atoms have no solidity.
Well, that's a really fascinating insight there. I think this is something that more and more physicists are now seriously contemplating, is the fact that the universe is a hologram, which means that, we're holograms, that somehow we are part of this kind of holographic universe. And certainly I think there's a lot of merit to that idea that, our physical appearance can be easily reconstituted elsewhere, through teleportation or something like that, which is, I think, part of this kind of holographic universe. As far as the reptilians are concerned, they would have the technological means to shapeshift. And if the universe is just a hologram, that would make it even easier for them to do that.
Exactly, yes. Have you yourself ever seen an alien being, a reptilian, or anything of that nature?
Nothing that I would say clearly is an extraterrestrial. I mean, I have had interactions with some people that I thought were extraterrestrial, and that Others thought that they were too, but these beings didn't say anything to me about being extraterrestrial. That was just something I thought.
How did you suspect that they may have been extraterrestrial? Is it physical features or things that they did or said?
Yeah, physical features, physical characteristics. Like there was one person who looked like a hybrid, looked like a grey human hybrid. And I remember shaking his hand, and I got an electric pulse from his hand. And I thought, wow, this guy's different. I mean, he's not normal. But he looked like some grey human hybrid, and he looked strange. He felt very different. And when I shook his hand, I got an electric shock. And to me, that was like, wow, this person is very unusual. But he didn't say anything about being an extraterrestrial. So, and there was one other person that could have been a human-looking extraterrestrial from his behavior. I talked about this person with a famous UFO researcher by the name of Wendell Stevens. I don't know if you remember Wendell Stevens. And he agreed. He said, yeah, I thought he was extraterrestrial as well. This was at a major conference in near San Francisco. So yeah, those are cases, but they're not slam dunk. I can't be sure. No one, they didn't say it themselves. It was just my hunch.
Have you ever seen a UFO?
Yes, I've seen quite a few UFOs. Some of them, I mean, many of them are what many people see are things like an object streaking across the sky, and then it will kind of pulse into a big light and then dissipate. Other times I've seen craft move in a zigzag, but it's always as lights. I've never seen anything up close. Just all I've seen is distant lights behaving in those ways that make me suspect that they're UFOs.
Not a craft like some people have said, like a flying saucer or cigar-shaped craft type object.
No, nothing like that. I mean, I have worked with people who have sent me photographs of some of these craft, photographs of like a flying triangle or a flying rectangle and flying saucers. I've had people send me photos, and when you blow up the photo, you see it quite clearly. But no, I haven't done anything like that myself. I've never taken photos of UFOs that are blown up that show anything.
But could some of those sightings and could some of those UFOs be actually military? And because we supposedly have very advanced technology that the ordinary member of, the population is not allowed to be told.
I think more and more in our modern era, what we are seeing in the skies, many of these are reverse engineered extraterrestrial spacecraft that have been built by the military intelligence community and major corporations. And one of the contacts I have in Florida has sent me photos and even a film of some of these flying triangles and squares, and he says he's actually being encouraged to take the photos by people within the Air Force, and that he's being taken on these craft, and that they're Air Force craft. And he says he's also being taken on other craft, and these are Nordic craft. These are flying saucers that belong to Nordic extraterrestrials. And he says that the Nordics are working with the Air Force now, that this is a kind of relatively recent development, just over the last 2 years, that these human-looking Nordic extraterrestrials have been working with the Air Force. But certainly, yes.
But how does he know that? Did he actually see these Nordic beings?
Yes, he saw them. He saw them, and he's taken photographs of their craft. And he's a contactee, so he shares with me his experiences with me, and he takes photos of the craft when they're leaving. So you've got that kind of corroboration for his testimony, and the same thing. He's seen the flying triangles and the flying rectangles that belong to the Air Force Special Operations, and he's been on board these craft as well.
Really?
And he's interacted with the Air Force personnel that are on these craft, and they talk to him and they want him to release these photographs, because this is part of the kind of like the disclosure initiative that they're pursuing.
But they're actually military and not alien spacecrafts then.
That's right. He's interacting with both military spacecraft and alien spacecraft, and that there's cooperation between the two. And I think that's generally the case for the United States and other countries, that when we see these craft up there, if we see a flying saucer or some other cigar-shaped craft, it could be military or it could be extraterrestrial. We don't know, because the technologies have become so advanced. You know, Roswell happened over 70 years ago. So you think, in over 70 years, how far could the secret government, could these aerospace companies gone in reverse engineering these technologies? And according to my information, they've gone very, very far, and they have technologies that now are very close to what the extraterrestrials have.
Actually, Nikola Tesla energy, right? And technology that he invented even before that time, and he died in 1943.
That's correct, yes. Nikola Tesla, it's known that he was actually working in the 1930s on flying saucers, that he was actually coming up with some designs of a flying saucer and teaching people on how to build these flying saucers. One person in particular, Otis T. Carr, says that Tesla taught him everything he knew about how to build a flying saucer. So this is the 1930s, and so Tesla knew these principles and was passing them on. So yeah, these technologies have been around for a long time. There's been research and development on them, dating all the way back to Roswell, even earlier back to Tesla, and then what the Germans were doing in the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. So, you know, it goes back 70, 80 years. So it's become very advanced.
What are your thoughts on the Billy Meier pictures and the whole Billy Meier's story, which has become very controversial as well and kind of dividing people?
Billy Meier is absolutely authentic. He did have contact with Pleiadian extraterrestrials, and he began taking a lot of photographs and video of what he took. But what happened was soon after he began releasing these, his organization was infiltrated by the intelligence community, and what they began to do was to seed a lot of fakes amongst the genuine and steal a lot of the genuine photos. So with the Billy Meier material, it's been corrupted by the intelligence community, which infiltrated his organization and substituted a lot of real photos with fakes that were made by the intelligence community to discredit Billy Meier. But yes, so essentially, absolutely, he's real. I think he continues to have a lot of contacts, but his organization has been infiltrated, and so it's very hard to find out, you know, the truth from the fiction.
Yeah, and he's not speaking publicly anymore.
I think this was part of the agreement that was reached with the intelligence community, that if he agreed to not become too public a figure and just speak through various spokespersons who could be chosen by the intelligence community, then they wouldn't kill him. And I think he was a real target. I think there were assassination attempts, and I think at the end he realized that it was important for him to release the information. That was more important, and rather than getting killed for being too uncompromising. And so he agreed to some of the conditions, and that meant to having an organization set up to look after him. And they did. They looked after him, but they made sure that the truth was kind of like hidden in a myriad of lies.
Mm-hmm. So that happened to him, well, according to you and sources. But why does that not happen to other people who are also presenting at least their truth and controversial material that could very well compromise them and also people within the secret space program or military.
It does happen. I mean, many people who have in the past released information on this topic were threatened and forced to leave the country. There's one case of another Florida researcher by the name of Adrian, and he was releasing some really impressive UFO photos of flying saucers, and he was having contacts with extraterrestrials. But he was also kind of forced out. He was intimidated into silence and had to leave the country. There's another person I know, Alex Collier, who was a genuine contactee and was having experiences with these beings from the Andromeda constellation, and he was threatened. He was told that if he spoke too much, that there would be repercussions. And sure enough, soon after that, he began experiencing family problems. His wife became very paranoid and decided to separate from him, and that kind of led to a lot of problems for him. So and he's was losing jobs and so forth. So yeah, people who know too much and are credible and producing too much good quality data, they can be threatened and silenced.
Have you ever experienced anything of that nature?
The only thing that happened to me was that I was professionally removed from academia. When I began to research this field in 2001, I shared what I had found with some of my academic superiors, and they were not supportive. Basically, I was told not to discuss this in public, not to associate the university with it. But as I became more known, and the Washington Post wrote an article about my research on President Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials at Edwards Air Force Base, then the university cut me off. So, even now, I wonder whether I was set up, whether the Washington Post had set me up to do that, to have me removed from the university. It's possible.
What is your best evidence, so to speak, that you can present to people through your work that can validate or support the claim of there actually being alien life all over the universe and even in parallel universes, and that UFO sightings that so many have seen is the real thing?
Well, the best evidence is a combination of what whistleblowers, insiders say that they have seen, leaked documents that discuss some of the events that they say that they participated in. So, for example, the Roswell crash, a very famous crash. There are many insiders, whistleblowers that have talked about their involvement with the Roswell crash. There are leaked documents that describe the Roswell crash in detail. There are also some official documents that have been released through the FOIA documentation process that show that there were programs associated with extraterrestrial life. For example, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit that was created by Army intelligence during the Second World War. And it was only in the 1950s that it was disbanded when the Air Force absorbed it into its own intelligence system. But from the early 1940s up until the 1950s, the Army actually did run a unit called the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. So the name itself is very suggestive of what the whistleblowers and the insiders are saying, that yes, the Army knew that alien craft were crashing, and the Army was sending teams of specialists all over the United States and all over the world to find these crashed craft and to basically bring them to the United States for study. And that there were programs called Operation Blue Fly and Operation Moondust, which concerned the recovery and the retrieval of crashed spacecraft. and bringing them to the United States and taking them to places like Dayton, Ohio, where the Air Force has had its premier research facility for over 80 years now.
Please explain to us, what is exoarchaeology?
Well, exoarchaeology is really looking at the ancient history of civilization on planet Earth. And so you're looking for evidence of civilizations. And when you're looking at exoarchaeology, you're looking at evidence of ancient extraterrestrial civilizations interacting on Earth. So, we talked about Zechariah Sitchin and ancient aliens already. But one of the things I would mention is, for example, the temple of Abydos, the glyphs from the temple, the very famous set of glyphs that show spacecraft and jet engines and tanks and what look like submarines. This is from the temple of Abydos, and that's like thousands of years old. And
that's in Egypt?
That's in Egypt. So, right there you have in Egypt these glyphs. This is an archaeological record of an ancient civilization that had these advanced technologies. And so this is where we talk about the gods. And so you look at some ancient texts like the King's List or the Book of Manetho, that all talk about the periods before humans began ruling Egypt, like the 30 known dynasties. That before that you had the rule of the demigods, and before that you had the rule of the gods. And they talk about Hephaestus and Osiris, and who are they? Who is Osiris? Who is Hephaestus? Well, this is where we come into the idea of exoarchaeology, that these are not gods in the sense of some kind of mythological being of worship. These are actually life and blood extraterrestrials that came from another world with advanced technologies that they used to help promote civilization on planet Earth.
So who do you think actually was behind building the pyramids? Some people, of course, suggest that extraterrestrial races or species at that time were part of the construction of the Great Pyramids in Giza.
Well, I believe that the Great Pyramid was built during the pre-flood era. So we're talking roughly around 12,000 years ago, just before the last Great Flood, which occurred around the time of the destruction of Atlantis. I mean, Plato, writing in 600 BC, talked about the destruction of Atlantis 9,000 years earlier. So that's 11,600 years ago, there was a great flood or a great destruction that affected the entire planet. Well, this, I believe, was the time that the Great Pyramid was built. I think the Great Pyramid was built as a record of the ancient world. I think the Great Pyramid had multiple functions. One, that it was a record. Another was that it was also a power generation station. It could be used because it has a lot of crystals in there, so it can generate a powerful electrical currents using the piezoelectric effect. But that also under the pyramids are these big rooms that are these records, historical records of the time of Atlantis, the time of Lemuria, the time of Hyperborea, and of ancient civilizations going back hundreds of thousands of years. So this is what I think is behind the pyramid, and I think the pyramid was built by extraterrestrials working with humans who were technologically very advanced just before the flood, to prepare for something that was going to come, something pretty major. And so for now, for example, even now you have elites having prepared places of refuge, huge underground facilities, or places in places like Greenland, where you can actually have a historical archive or vaults preserving a lot of human history and seeds and all of that. So the ancients did the same, and I think that's where the that's what the Great Pyramid was all about.
Do you think that was the reason why President Trump recently wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark?
I think Trump is a real estate agent at heart, and he's always looking for new deals. And maybe he was really just kind of like doing a fishing expedition there. Just seeing whether this was something that Denmark would be open to. Knowing Trump, I think there was also a kind of very serious aspect to it that he probably thought, well, what's Denmark want with Greenland? Maybe, the United States could use Greenland much more and kind of like explore the secrets there.
There certainly are major military bases there in Greenland.
Already you have the US has a major military presence in Greenland, and so the question is, well, why does the US have an interest in buying it when you already have military bases there? Maybe Trump's been briefed on some of the secrets there, but no doubt about it that I think Trump was probably just seeing how open Denmark was to possibly selling that very large island.
No sale yet. So please talk about the so-called archons, demons, jinn, that holy and spiritual scriptures talk about in the Gnostic writings, of course discovered in Nag Hammadi, also in Egypt in 1945. They talk about the archons, same as what the Muslims talked about the jinns. Who are these entities, and could they actually be extraterrestrial or interdimensional, obviously?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I think with the archons, with the jinn, we're talking about interdimensional beings that come from realms that people might describe as hell. One of the things that I found very interesting, if you look at Dante's Inferno, or you look at the book of Enoch, where he describes going into the different realms of hell. There's different realms in there. They talk about disembodied spirits. They also talk about like extraterrestrials. Like I was talking earlier about different extraterrestrial groups, like the reptilians or the draconians or the greys and insectoids. And then you have the different human-looking groups. Well, it's very interesting that if you look at the book of Enoch, where he describes these different realms, or you look at Dante's Inferno, where he describes the different heavens and the different hells, you see in some of these realms, you see these beings that people would describe today as the archons or the jinn. You see other beings that might be described as like devils, or like the draconian reptilians, or like the greys. And then you see the human, the angels. So I think that's probably close to the truth, that it's not just one thing or the other. It really is a very big kind of like range of entities. And I think in these historical texts, the Book of Enoch, Dante's Divine Comedy, you actually have attempts to describe both the interdimensionals and the physical beings that are, say, extraterrestrial, that humanity can encounter either during out-of-body experiences, during their sleep, or when they get into spacecraft, or go to distant worlds, that you can encounter these different entities. So yes, definitely I think there's a range of beings.
So what is an archon? It's an interdimensional being, not a physical being, or what?
Yes, I would think that the archon is like an interdimensional being, almost like a disembodied spirit that can come in and take possession of people and influence them in some way, like someone that is weak-willed, almost like demon possession. These are people that we know from watching movies like The Exorcist, that they are demon possessed. So, we're talking about something like that the archons can influence people, take them over. I think when we're looking at archons per se, some of them may actually be, say, senior figures in the Illuminati or in the ruling bloodline families, that these archons can come in and take over, say, one of these leading figures and just completely take over the body and control that body. And so that person, lives under the dictates of this archon, who's using that person interdimensionally to pursue their agenda.
So they're not the same as the reptilians, but they can actually possess a reptilian the same way that they can also possess a human being, supposedly.
That's a very important point right there that you've said it right there. I think these archons are these interdimensional beings that are very, very powerful. They can take possession of people fairly easily, depending on how well developed their mental ability is. And they can also take control of reptilians, that the draconian reptilians, who are very physical beings like ourselves, but even they can be taken over by these archons.
So they're actually superior to these beings, or I mean, the reptilian physical beings, or what? What would you think?
Yes. That I think these archons, ultimately, they are the ones that come in and they take control or possession of senior human leaders or senior reptilians, draconian, and take control and rule that group that way. I mean, there's a really good movie which I think illustrates this very nicely, Jupiter Ascending. You probably have seen it. But it's a form of soft disclosure. I think it's a very good movie to watch for people, because you see all these different groups mentioned in there. The human-looking extraterrestrials. You see the greys. You see the insectoids. You see the reptilians, the draconian reptilians, and you see the archons. And what's very interesting there is that the archons are these beings that are depicted as like eternal, where their consciousness can move in and out of body, that they keep their body young for thousands of years using kind of like the essence of kind of like a human DNA or human genetics. They use that to preserve their lifelong. But it showed the draconian reptilians being subservient to these human-looking archons, and I think that's pretty close to what's going on. That is close to the truth.
Mm-hmm. So that leads me to the question that we often ask our guests: what happens when we die? Is reincarnation then a soul harvesting karma wheel trap in order to keep the human being souls on the planet and reincarnate time after time, again and again, because these archons feed on human beings' energy, such as anger, anxiety, hate?
I think when we're looking at this question of reincarnation, the Earth itself is controlled. It's a prison planet, and I mentioned we were talking about the archons, and that they are the ones that are like ultimately in control. They are these spirit forces, kind of like demonic, that can control very senior people in the ruling bloodline families, that they can actually even control extraterrestrials that come here, that they can influence some of these beings. So when we die, I think the physical body obviously is just a vehicle. This is one of the things that the extraterrestrials talk about. And, and I've actually talked to people about this, that the human body is a vehicle, is a vessel. And it's not such a difficult thing to remove the soul consciousness technologically from one body to another. That does happen. That the groups do have that kind of technology to move it. But when we die through the natural process and our soul consciousness leaves this physical body, to an extent, unless we have evolved our consciousness sufficiently, we are going to be trapped on the earth. We're going to come back to the earth because we have unresolved issues of anger, of retribution, of lust, or whatever it is. We have these unresolved issues that draws us back to earth like a magnet. And this is why, religion is important. I think, like when you look at Buddhism, Buddhism gives you a kind of much more of an intellectual recipe for how to escape the cycle of rebirth, where you achieve nirvana, basically get into this place of equanimity where you're not driven by the passions, and we see the same sort of things in the Hindu religion and the Christian religion. So all religions, I think, give us a pathway to escape this cycle of rebirth, but it's not easy because ultimately we have to be forgiving. We have to forgive those that do injustice to us, that makes us at some point feel angry or bitter, or maybe we have, desires, greed to, have large wealth or whatever it is, whatever unresolved issues. Until we escape these things, then we're going to be trapped here, and religion can help us navigate the way out.
But isn't religion part of the control system, a control agenda, in order to enslave humanity and control them with fear of hell, fear of being a sinner and being bad in one way or the other?
All religions are very similar. Earlier on, you asked me the question about Billy Meyer. Do I believe in Billy Meyer being a genuine contactee? And I said, absolutely, yes. He started off genuine, but then he was forced to accept an organization around him, and the whole thing became compromised because there was infiltration. It's the same thing. If you look at all of the founders of all of the great religions, whether we're talking about Buddha, Krishna, Christ, Muhammad, all of these people, in my opinion, had a direct connection with the divine, that they all had some kind of insight into how we can escape this cycle of death and rebirth. They all had that. But then what happened was that around them, you had an organization being established very, very quickly, and that became religion. And that's where you actually have the compromise, and the control groups come in and they say, we can use this for our source. So yes, to an extent, all major religions have been compromised. But if you look at all of the teachings of the founders of those religions, all of those have the truth. So the closer you get to the truth of that religion, the more likely you're going to get helpful information that can take us out of this cycle of death and rebirth.
But if every religion is teaching us, even the New Age movement and people who are into that, who believe that we go to this heavenly place, everything looks beautiful, you meet your dead relatives looking their best, everything is wonderful, and then you will see this life review that a lot of near-death experiencers have talked about also. Could this be part of this archontic plan, this archon constructed white light dimension, heavenly realm, in order to trap people and make them go back into a new body, wiped memory, not being able to remember past lives, and then go through the whole treadmill again?
Whatever philosophy you accept, if it's something that teaches you to be forgiving, loving, not to harbor desires for the attractions of earth, that whatever philosophy that is, whatever tradition that comes from, that's going to prepare you. That in a way, I think you're correct, that, if we get attached to the idea that, escaping the cycle of birth and death and rebirth and so forth is all about, going into the white light, there's danger there, because you're then thinking in terms of a phenomenon. The white light, I'm going to think of the white light, and you can be manipulated. The bottom line is, are you a loving person? Are you forgiving? Have you let go of all desires for material wealth, acquisition, greed, control, power? If you've done all these things, then I think you're ready to progress. Now, how that's done, I don't know, because I'm still here like you. We're here, we're still working it out. But I think it can be done, and we need to take our inspiration from whoever. But I think that's the core set of values, and you don't have to look at a religious founder to do that, because humanism teaches the same thing. Be loving, forgiving, caring. Don't be attached to worldly things.
So how do we escape this reincarnation soul trap? And how do we avoid going to this place and be attracted or even trapped into this white light if it's not a real dimension? Can we, if we are full consciousness, once we leave the body, when we're no longer physical at the point of death, can we choose to go out of this matrix, away from this earthly realm in some kind of way? Is it a matter of choice?
I think it is a matter of choice. Because if there's something that is unfinished business for you, whatever it is, whether it's, anger, revenge, greed, acquisition, if there's something you desire in terms of material existence on earth, you come back. It's as simple as that. You come back. This is where I think the Buddhists are absolutely correct. As long as you have desire for something from this material plane of reality on earth, you're going to come back. So we need to reach that point where we don't have desire for the material things of earth, and that's when we can escape everything that's been set up there, whether it's a kind of false light dichotomy with the real light, or whatever traps that exist. I think ultimately it comes back to what you carry in your heart. I mean, even the ancient traditions talk about this. If you talk about Hermeticism, they say that at the time of death, your heart or your soul is weighed in terms of if your soul weighs more than a feather, then you come back. You're reborn, and to me that's a sign that, well, that's a kind of like a metaphor. Well, if your heart weighs more than a feather, in other words, you have some kind of material desire for life on earth again, then you're going to come back. But if you don't have any material desire for life on earth, you're going to be lighter than a feather. You escape. You don't come back.
So it is a matter of choice if you just know that you can actually choose.
Yeah, it is a matter of choice. I think we do make that choice in terms of how we live our lives. What is it that drives us? When we're thinking about, for example, with me, I'm trying to think about, say, the ruling bloodline families or the draconian reptilians that are controlling us. It's very easy to kind of get angry and upset and like, well, we hope to expose those beings and, have them hanged or something or whatever. But it's like, well, but that's not good, because as an individual, I'm also growing as they are growing. And so the thing is that I need to understand that it's like a hierarchy, that they themselves are probably minions of someone else that's more powerful than them. Like the draconians might be minions of the archons, and the archons might be minions of someone else that's even more powerful. So, it's just like, it's to understand that everyone that's doing these dark things, that they might think that they're under the control of someone else and they have no choice. And so it's like to find that place where you can be forgiving, while exposing the truth of what these different groups are doing. But you yourself, at an individual level, you're not caught up in anger, rage, and bitterness over what has been done to you and others because of this.
But when we are in a physical body, how can we possibly deny having desires like eating and sexual desires, and we need things, clothes and a house and of course a job? So how can we deny these desires? Everybody has a great desire to have a good life, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the challenge right there. I mean, how do we escape the cycle of rebirth? And you look at the desires that we have. The Buddhism talks about this at great length, that the root of suffering is desire. And they're absolutely correct. The root of suffering is desire.
But why is it bad to desire to have a good life, to live a good life on this planet while we're here?
Well, you can have a value set. You can have like an aspiration. Maybe we can call it a desire for a good life. But that's an abstraction. A good life, or happiness. These are abstractions. We can want those. You know, I mean, that's a kind of an aspiration. And maybe the best ways to distinguish that from a desire, like a concrete desire, say like like having power over others, or having a high-paying job, or a powerful car, or having a partner, an attractive partner. You know, these are desires because you're desiring material things, and as long as you do that, then you're trapped in this cycle of rebirth.
But we are physical beings, though. So we need physical things while we're here.
Yes, we do need physical things while we're here, but we can do this in a way that's dispassionate. I mean, this is something that, groups have been discussing this for thousands of years. I, for example, just recently was reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and he was talking about the Stoic philosophy of the ancient Romans. And it's the same thing. It's all about being equanimity, achieving this state of equanimity, not being driven by unrealistic desires. Maybe that's the way. I mean, the way the Romans described it in Stoicism was not to have unrealistic desires. Find a balance, healthy desires. A desire for a healthy life, or a rich life, as opposed to a life of power and control and conquest. That these things are fleeting and ephemeral. And Marcus Aurelius was saying that better to seek those more abstract desires of doing good and being kind to others. So I think this is where you kind of like can learn and make progress. But certainly I think this is a problem that goes back thousands of years. Many of the world's best philosophers have tried to come up with answers. But I think that if we as individuals seek the answers rather than blindly following a religious traditions, we're more likely to progress far, as opposed to just being caught up in a religious dogma where we can be easily manipulated.
Please talk about an inner Earth civilization. Admiral Byrd supposedly flew into a hole in the ground in Antarctica and discovered a hidden secret world, an inner civilization inside of the Earth, hollow Earth.
This was something that is in Admiral Byrd's diaries that are very much disputed, where he describes a trip to the South Pole where he penetrated into the inner Earth and met a group of beings called the Ariani, and that they flew these flying saucers that had like Nazi insignia on them, like the swastika and so forth. This was one of the things that he described. Actually, not the swastika, the Iron Cross. They had these insignia of the German nationalist movement. So this is one of the things that was described in the diaries that has been very controversial. Some people swear by the diaries, others dismiss them as a fabrication. But I think there's something there. There's some truth in the diaries, because we know some facts. We know for fact that Admiral Byrd did actually fly off while at a mission in Antarctica, and he was lost for several hours. So no one knew where he was for several hours. So that's a fact. So could he have met with this inner Earth civilization, the Ariani? Absolutely. There's a lot of stories about the Germans being given help in South America and Antarctica by a human-looking group that were descendants of the Hyperboreans. Well, the Ariani could be that group. Certainly, they believe that they were the descendants of the Aryan peoples that came into kind of Central Asia many thousands of years ago. So I can't give you a definitive answer on whether Admiral Byrd went into the inner Earth during his South Pole expedition. I think he did, but there's no conclusive proof that he did.
But do you believe that that an inner Earth civilization actually exists?
Absolutely, yes. I think that there are multiple inner Earth civilizations that exist that go back many thousands of years. We see this in some of the ancient texts. We see this like in the Vedic texts, where they talk about some of the inner Earth civilizations. They talk about the Nagas, who is a kind of reptilian group that lives in the inner Earth. We also have people in the 18th century, 19th century saying that they went into the inner Earth and that they had encounters with inner Earth beings. One of the more famous is Edward Bulwer Lytton, who wrote a book called The Coming Race. And in that book, he described this inner Earth civilization and how they were expanding in the Earth, and eventually they would come to the surface of the planet. And if we weren't sufficiently technologically evolved, that they would try to take us over. So that was Edward Bulwer Lytton's theory of the inner Earth, and that inspired the Thule Society of Germany, that was directly responsible for the building of the flying saucer program, first for the Weimar Republic in Germany, and then for Nazi Germany under Hitler. And more recently, we've had people like Corey Goode saying that he's been taken into the inner Earth and interacting with some of these inner Earth civilizations.
So the Earth is hollow, and there's a whole world in there. How do you walk around there? Is it like anti-gravity, or gravity in a different kind of way than we experience on the surface?
The way it's been described to me is that the Earth is more like a honeycomb rather than hollow. So especially when we're talking about the crust of the planet Earth, the crust is like 120 miles thick, or like 170 kilometers thick. And within that 170 kilometers thick crust, you have many big pockets, many big caverns, enormous caverns, as big as Greenland. And that these caverns, they are filled with life, with vegetation, water. And scientific studies have actually shown that there is more water buried in the Earth's crust than there is on the surface. So scientists have confirmed that. So right there, you actually have the primordial condition for life existing in the Earth's crust. And so some of these insiders say that the Earth is like a honeycomb, where basically you have these huge pockets, these huge cavern systems all over the Earth, filled by different species, whether they're human-looking groups or whether they're reptilian groups, and that they have these big bases there, civilizations there, and that even now the military of the United States and other countries are trying to build their own bases in some of these underground caverns.
So the Earth is not hollow with a central sun. It's more like caverns and big open spaces.
That's right, yes. So you still have a core, an inner core, and you have the mantle, and then you have the crust. And of course, the surface of the Earth is very thin, and that's the crust, and it's only about 120 miles thick. But the mantle is several thousand miles thick, and the core is also a couple of thousand miles thick. And those, as far as I know, the mantle and the core are not inhabitable. But the crust of the Earth, that 120 miles or so of the crust, is habitable, because you have these giant pockets forming in there where you can have water, animal life, vegetable life, and a huge civilization flourishing in there for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years without any problem.
But how can this civilization and animals and creatures, how can they survive without a sunlight and air in the way that we know it?
How can they survive without sunlight? Well, we know that at the bottom of the oceans there are many species that survive without sunlight. As far as I know, there's a lot of thermal energy that can be accessed from these cavern systems. So that supplies them with heat, with whatever nutrients they need that comes from, say, magma, volcanic eruptions nearby these cavern systems.
So it's lit up. It's not dark. It's not total darkness then.
Yes, there's a kind of a lot of crystals that exist in the cavern systems that naturally light up. So you don't actually have like anything like a sun, but these cavern systems can be lit up through natural lighting. Many mechanisms, natural mechanisms that light it up. So yes, I think the sun is not essential, or exposure to sunlight is not essential for a civilization to flourish.
And this civilization, are they human beings and reptilian, and do they live side by side?
As far as I know, the oldest ones are reptilian. The newer ones are human-looking civilizations. For example, prior to, say, Atlantis or Lemuria or Hyperborea, where you had all these catastrophic situations, you had technologically advanced societies that had reached the apex of their technical evolution. But you had then, as you have now, elites that monopolized these technologies. And so when you had cataclysms on the surface of the planet, maybe 95% maybe as much as 99% of the surface of the planet had to live through these cataclysms. 95% were wiped out. 4% survived and had to rebuild again. And 1% had the advanced technologies, and they either went off planet or they went into the inner earth where they built some of these civilizations, these bases under the earth. And over the course of tens of thousands of years, they began to kind of like interact because they had advanced technologies. They could travel through the Earth's crust using these technologies, and they could begin interacting with Earth's surface humanity. One of the things that I found very fascinating from Corey Goode's testimony, and I don't know of others talking about this, but he said that many times in Earth's history, the inner Earth groups appeared on the surface of the planet and pretended that they were gods or that they were extraterrestrials from other planets. And so this is one of the things that he says that the inner Earth civilizations did to protect themselves from surface humanity, because for whatever reason, their evolution in the inner Earth is very slow. It's a very slow evolution. But our evolution on the surface of the planet is very, very rapid. For some reason, and maybe this is part of why the extraterrestrials have genetically modified us and controlled us for hundreds of thousands of years, that, we live to maximum like 100. So everything has to be really quick. We want to fulfill our lives quickly and build and create things. And so evolution here is very, very quick, as opposed to the inner Earth civilization where they live to like 1,000 years. So it's much slower.
And these beings can actually coexist then without major problems.
That's apparently what's been happening, that they can coexist without major problems. Whereas, we on the surface are the ones with all the problems, because in a way we're a proxy for their conflicts.
Remote viewing and highly developed psychic intelligence. What is that exactly? What is it used for, and how is it developed?
Remote viewing is something that has been developed by the intelligence community in the United States since the 1970s. Earlier than that, in places like the Soviet Union. But it's been created, been set up as a scientific application of what people have been doing through psychic means for many, many decades, or many, many centuries, really. You have a lot of natural psychics that are able to do things, see things, and they're very, very accurate. And this has been known for a long time. So remote viewing is an attempt by the intelligence community to set up a kind of protocol, a training mechanism where you could actually harness that natural psychic ability that many people have and use that in a way that is going to be very accurate for intelligence gathering purposes. And so that's how the remote viewing protocols were set up. As it was set up, other people, other groups within this began finding that there were other means of utilizing psychic abilities. And this is remote influencing, where you can influence people to do things. You know, we know that, you know, through hypnosis, you can influence a person to do things. Well, remote influencing is something that is used to get a person to do something without them being even aware of it, that you're influencing them through psychic means.
Like remote mind control?
Like remote mind control, yes. That you can get them to get up and turn off the television, or get up and go out for a walk or something. That this is something that remote influencing does all the time. That, for example, many abductees say that, well, you know, I just got up and walked out the house and there was this UFO out there and I went in the UFO. Well, you know, they got out because there was the remote influencing. Someone in that UFO used a remote influencing device to get that person to come out. There's also other more powerful psychic means, such as remote kind of like assassination, or psychic assassination, where people's psychic abilities are sufficiently developed where they can become psychic assassins.
Without having to go through trauma-based mind control that we hear, like the Manchurian Candidate?
They could. People might go through that. They might be used for that kind of level of control, because what the intelligence community has been trying to do for a long time is to control people with natural psychic abilities so that you can get them to do what they want. Now, it's one thing to train natural psychics to do this for remote influencing or remote viewing. It's another thing to get a person to participate in remote assassination, where you kill a person or you make them desperately sick or something. You know, that's where you're probably going to have to do something like trauma-based mind control. And they do. The intelligence community has been doing this. MK Ultra has been going on for a long, long time, and they use these kinds of mind control tricks on psychics as well to get them to do these things. But you know, these psychics that are subjected to mind control or trauma-based mind control, they're always going to be a little weaker than those that are true psychics that have that natural ability.
Remote viewers, then?
Well, you know, people who do remote influencing, remote viewing, or you know, that are natural, that don't have any kind of trauma-based mind control used on them, because you know their psyche is unified. It's not as though they have a split personality. Whereas people who have gone through trauma-based mind control and are being used for these psychic things, there's a part of their mind that is cut off and separated. So they're always going to be a little bit weaker, not as effective.
So remote viewing is like somebody sitting, is it through meditation or focusing? And they could be sitting in Hawaii and listening in on a conversation in Denmark or anywhere else.
Well, that's not quite the way in which remote viewing is discussed. But it's certainly an application where maybe it's called remote hearing or something like that, but where you can actually tune in to hear things. But certainly, the remote viewing has always been on the visual, getting a visual imprint of what is going on, and the remote viewers are trained to write down those visual imprints as opposed to auditory imprints. But some remote viewers might be getting auditory inputs as well, and they might be writing that out as well. So I don't see why that wouldn't be a part of the remote viewing.
So what is the agenda behind 5G and the reason for imposing all of these 5G frequencies on humanity and at rapid speed these days? We are in September 2019.
What I know of 5G is that it uses a frequency band that can be very disruptive to human behavior. And what makes 5G very dangerous is that, unlike 4G and 3G technologies, you need to have a lot more radio towers. So with 4G and 3G, a radio tower can be like several miles away from where you live, and your cell phone is still able to pick up the signal and transmit and receive, and you can have conversations or have Wi-Fi. But with 5G technology, it needs to be only several hundred meters away. So it's going to be much closer, and it's broadcasting on a band of the electromagnetic frequency, which can be very disruptive to the human body. And so, a lot of people are very, very skeptical and warning about the danger of 5G, just because you're going to have a proliferation of radio towers transmitting all of these frequencies for high-speed Wi-Fi. And so rather than there being maybe just several dozen in whatever city you live in, you can actually have hundreds or even thousands of 5G towers all over the place, near your schools, near where you work, near your home. And so this is where people are very skeptical and saying 5G is not good.
Do you think that these 5G frequencies can be used for mind control as well?
Electronic means have been used for mind control purposes. There is a really good book by Nick Begich called Mind Control, where he goes over the electromagnetic means that have been used by the intelligence community to manipulate people. So people can actually get an electromagnetic signal which is specific to them, where you actually hear voices. And he calls it mind of God technology, voice of God technology, where you hear a voice and it says to you that, I am Jesus, and I'm here to help you get to the next step in your evolution, and you should do this and do that. And so this is very manipulative, because people who hear a voice in their head are naturally going to believe that they're special. So it's very surreptitious, because there's already that psychological predisposition that if you hear a voice in your head, that's special, because not everyone hears a voice in their head. You're either insane or you're special. So, not everyone is going to say, well, I'm insane, I hear a voice in their head. First, you're going to think you're special. So if that voice says, you're special, I am, Archangel Sananda from the 6th dimension, and I've chosen you to be my spokesperson, and this is what I want you to do. People can do that, which is why channeling is so dangerous. You have to be very, very careful with channeling, because this could be a result of this kind of electronic mind control. The first channels, the ones that I think were most credible, they were the ones that created Faraday cages around themselves, like for example, the raw material. They used Faraday cages. Actually, I'm thinking of the group of 9, the channel, a group that channeled the 9, that they used a Faraday cage. So there are people who do the channeling that understand the danger of some kind of electromagnetic interference. So they do it within a Faraday cage. but definitely yes. This is the sort of thing that 5G would make easier for the intelligence community to be able to kind of like use these kinds of electronic forms of mind control. So a lot more people all of a sudden start hearing voices in their head and either think that they're insane or they're special, a spokesperson for some intergalactic or some high religious figure or whatever.
What are the possible dangers and health effects of electromagnetic radiation and frequencies?
There have been some studies done of people that are living very close or working very close to 4G towers. I think smart meters is another example. Houses that have these smart meters, they're finding that people who get very close to these, even for short periods of time, only for like several minutes, start to experience some sort of genetic alteration. So there's an impact on the genetics with smart meters. And so more generally, electromagnetic frequencies, people who use cell phones frequently and have them by their ear, that can be carcinogenic, and so you can actually have brain tumors appearing. So certainly this is known much more about the effect of kind of say cell phones and smart meters, how they have this kind of really negative effect on the health. And 5G, they haven't done any studies on it yet, but the suspicion is, the strong suspicion is that this will be even worse.
Is it possible that 5G and the implementation all over the world of 5G and also smart meters, that there's a connection to AI, artificial intelligence?
Well, that's the scariest thought, is AI, because AI is something that's being pushed quite aggressively by a number of people in the telecommunications industry and more generally. And of course, there are a lot of people that are warning what happens. I mean, most recently you had James Havelock talking about the threat posed by AI, and that if we're not very careful, he calls it the Novacene era, where we're going to enter this period of time where humans are going to be dominated by AI. And we're already seeing that with the way in which AlphaZero has become dominant in a number of board games. There are very significant people who have been warning about AI for a number of years now. Stephen Hawking was warning about it. Elon Musk has been warning about it. So there's a real danger about AI, and we need to keep in mind that when we're looking at some of the information that comes to us from these whistleblowers, from these insiders, they say even extraterrestrials are worried about AI, that extraterrestrials have had their own negative experiences with AI, and that it was a threat to their civilization.
But could some of these extraterrestrial beings in fact be artificial intelligence, say from the future?
There are some groups that are influenced by artificial intelligence. I do know of a famous case called the Amicizia case in Italy from 1956 to 1978. And you had a human-looking extraterrestrial group that was interacting with over 100 people from Italy, Germany, Austria, and so forth. But then you had another group that was basically AI controlled, and that they were in some kind of conflict with the human-looking group of extraterrestrials. So here you have an example of an AI group hunting a human-looking group of extraterrestrials to another planet. And so that shows that, yes, some groups of extraterrestrials could in fact be AI.
What are your thoughts on climate change and also man-made climate change? Is it real or a hoax, as some people are suggesting?
I think the kind of whole climate change issue has been kind of manipulated in a way for people to just focus on, say, the level of carbon in the upper atmosphere, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and other carbon-producing gases that are going into the upper atmosphere, and just become preoccupied by that, and to just kind of focus our attention on that and try and respond to that, which I think is very superficial, because that's only part of what's going on. I mean, the real issue in terms of global warming is not so much that we are producing more and more carbon emissions than any time in our kind of recent history, because that's true, and that is having an impact. But that's what's really important, is that if we look at data from the rest of our solar system, we can see that the rest of our solar system is going through some kind of transition where there is a warming of the different planets. And if we look at the Earth itself, if we look at the interior region of the Earth, there is something that is triggering volcanic activity around the Earth. And especially when we look at a place like Antarctica, where a lot of the world's fresh water is frozen and stored, people think that Antarctica is melting because of global warming caused by carbon emissions. But in fact, Antarctica is melting because underneath it, all of these volcanoes are being activated by the Earth's core and the mantle, which are being triggered by these cosmic rays that are coming into the Earth at unprecedented levels, because the heliosphere that surrounds our solar system is very weak at the moment. The sun is at a solar minimum. It's very weak at the moment. And the magnetosphere that protects the Earth from the sun and from cosmic rays has been weakening tremendously. Some people suspect that it's going to collapse. But the thing is that this has been shielding us from cosmic rays. And as the cosmic rays pour in, they come in through the polar regions and trigger the core, and that's releasing a lot of volcanic energy, and that's what's resulting in the warming of both the south and the north poles.
So it is natural climate change, not man-made.
I mean, to put a kind of a figure on it, I would say it's probably 80% natural climate change and 20% man-made.
What is the latest hot topic in the field of ufology at this very moment? It's in September 2019. Is there something special that you can share with us?
Yes, it's the creation of Space Force in the United States. I think Space Force is something that is going to make it possible for the US government to officially release the truth about what's been going on. In other words, with Space Force, you're going to have the development of, or the release of, some of these advanced electromagnetic propulsion systems that are being used in building flying saucers, flying triangles, flying rectangles that are being used by the secret space program for decades now. That some of these technologies are going to be released, and the American public and the world public is going to be told that, well, we actually can protect our planet from hostile extraterrestrials. And then after that, you're going to have the revelation of the truth about extraterrestrial life. Because I think that was always going to be an important requirement for the truth to ever come forward, is that before the truth would be revealed, the US military had to have something that it could present as a credible protector force against hostile extraterrestrials. Because, you think about it from the military perspective, would they want the public to know that, yes, extraterrestrials exist and they have flying saucers, and well, we can't protect you against them because we only have jets. Well, that was never going to happen. Now, with the creation of Space Force, the foundation, I think, has been set for the announcement of these advanced technologies that have been secretly developed. And that's why I think the Air Force and the Navy have been encouraging people to report on these sightings. why my contact from Florida has been giving me such good quality photos, why the Navy has been encouraging its pilots to release reports of these UFO sightings in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And I think we are on the verge of a lot of advanced technologies that can revolutionize the aerospace industry being released. And as for the hot issue that I would kind of like really want to leave the viewers on a positive note, is that the US Navy quite recently has sponsored the release of patents which deal with things like electromagnetic propulsion, electromagnetic shields, also anti-gravity, gravity wave amplifiers. That these are technologies that are going to revolutionize the aerospace industry and take us away from the fossil fuel era into the new era of electromagnetics. And that's a huge era, a huge thing that's going to happen that will revolutionize the transportation industry. And we're kind of in the midst of watching that happen very, very quickly.
And what is your most positive or best message for people watching this at the moment?
Be optimistic. I think people can take heart from the fact that a lot of information is being released now. There is more truth that you can get on the internet right now than at any period in human history. That if you're open and have an inquisitive mind and are discerning, you can get to the truth of things that have perplexed humanity's greatest thinkers for thousands of years. And it's all available right now on the internet. So yeah, be optimistic, have an open mind, exercise your discernment, and it's all there. And everyone has a role to play. We can all make a contribution in our own way, whether we're doing so in terms of the big picture, in terms of like being a spokesperson or having a radio, television show like yours, or having a smaller impact on your small community. All of that counts. It's all part of one big wave that is unfolding on the planet Earth. So, yeah, I want to thank you, Lof, for having me on your show, and Lucas for having me appear and be interviewed.
Thank you very much, Michael Salla. And if people want to contact you, how can they get in touch with you or learn more about your work and your books and your lectures?
They can just go to my website, exopolitics.org. That's spelled EXOPOLITICS.org. And I have all my articles there, and my books are available there, so you can order from there. And if you want to contact me, if you have information to share about your own experiences, I read every email. I might not be able to answer everyone, but I definitely will read whatever information you have to share.
It's been absolutely fascinating, intriguing, mind-blowing, and wonderful to have you on the show. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Michael Salla, for doing this interview with Age of Truth TV. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Very intriguing questions, Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Dr. Michael Salla, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and hit the bell for notifications. Your support is very needed and greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.